Hello and welcome to the last episode of Trutalk, a companion podcast about the film The Truman Show, created by me, Christopher Bingham. This episode will be the least structured out of all of them because ultimately it's kind of just a listicle of details about the film, goofs, mistakes, trivia, and things that didn't fit into other episodes, but that I wanted to talk about anyway. The Truman Show is a fantastic movie. I love it, but it's not perfect. It holds an incredible amount of value, nostalgia, and, levels of detail that make it so enjoyable to rewatch. But, there are people who won't like it. It's a really goofy movie. I often watch The Truman Show with someone else who has never seen it before, and the most recent time that I watched it, something that struck me was how fucking goofy and silly The Truman Show is. Like, it's a silly film. It's a very silly film. It's a very strangely fast-paced, kind of expressive film with a lot of very goofy imagery, a lot of not necessarily comedy, just silliness, if that makes sense. I kind of found myself watching it after, all these years being like, what the how is this? This is so fast and hyperactive and weird. And I think maybe it's a sign that I've watched it too many times, that I've completely overdosed on it. But it had never struck me quite how goofy it is. And I think to some viewers, the more meaningful and intelligent and dramatic elements of the film, for some viewers, may be overpowered by its weirdness.
Wow.
There were 16 versions of the script. I mean, now that's not uncommon in film. A large production like this will be written and rewritten and go through loads of extensive rewrites, and you will tend to lose track, actually, of how many versions there are of a script unless they're kind of specifically documented as new versions. So I totally believe that there have been 16 or even more versions of the script. The original, and this comes up a lot when you look into articles about the film, the original script was far darker. It was very just out of film school, edgy, wanting to kind of make a name for yourself kind of vibes. I read at least one article that kind of slams Andrew Niccol for being maybe a little bit too try-hard in his first draft. It was set in New York, and Truman was addicted to pills, and he was an alcoholic and abusive. In one scene, he hires a prostitute, and in another scene, he's on a train, and actors are enacting a rape, and he doesn't intervene. And then as he gets off the train and leaves, the actors stop pretending to be in that situation and get up and dust themselves off and express how weird it was that he didn't get involved. Yeah, what you're hearing me describe is a shit film, right? We don't want that. In this house, we love and respect Jim Carrey, but we don't watch The Number 23. So you can see how that initial version of the script wasn't going to be very good. But when reading it, you see the DNA that loads of those elements are already there. And what happens is what usually happens, which is a process of refinement and iteration to get to the real juice of what a film is about. I have a quote here from Andrew Niccol talking about the early versions of the script from that BFI article that I referenced in an earlier episode. He's talking about the end of the film, and specifically that it keeps going after Truman goes through the door. He says, he went into his own souvenir store. There were cardboard cutouts of himself. It got even more warped. He even jumped on a studio tour tram with this guy driving it, giving the facts of his life that he didn't even know. Something I think about a lot with The Truman Show, and I think is relevant here, is the idea of less is more. The Truman Show really exemplifies this mantra, and we see that with this original script, that, there's too much. It's too dark, it's too weird, it's too edgy, and we need to pare it back. And we see it with the editorial decisions that have been made, why certain scenes are deleted. The greatest example of this, in my opinion, is the baby storyline. One of the most significant deleted scenes is a meeting with the cast and crew. It's Christoph and some of the main cast members meeting after Truman's breakdown and discussing the next few weeks of the show and what changes are going to be made.
However, on a more optimistic note, I am pleased to announce that television's first on-air conception will still take place.
It implies that the child element, the fact that they want Truman to conceive a child, was a far more important component in the film as they were producing it, which they eventually decided to remove. And I think it makes the film a lot better. It's still in there, of course, but it's not spoken about in such detail. It's left to our imaginations. And in this deleted scene, Christoph basically lays it all out. This is all stuff that's really, really interesting if you're a nerd about the film, but I'm really, really, really glad that they didn't put it in. And it's the same for the escape sequence. I mentioned that there is a deleted scene that I don't think you can see anywhere. I've not been able to find it. Maybe it wasn't even shot. Maybe it was taken out of the script before shooting, where during the escape scene at the end of the film, Marlon actually finds Truman and he kind of stands there for a moment and there's a tension of what he's going to do. And then he just pretends that he hasn't seen him and walks back to the search party. There's debate. I found people on Reddit talking about this and discussing whether they think it should have been in or not. And it would be a nice kind of redemption moment for Marlon. But at the same time, I love Marlon as a tragic victim in this film. I think that has depth and more kind of longevity for me because this scene was omitted. There's also some more fun deleted scenes, that don't really add anything or maybe actually add some more kind of comic relief. They make the movie a bit funnier, a bit goofier. There's a whole load of deleted scenes that show different product placement. And I think we get enough product placement in the movie as it is, right? We get the impression that Meryl is always fucking talking about some new thing and doing her little radio host voice, right? We didn't need more of that, but it's fun to see. And there's particularly one bit that's very goofy where she gives him this onesie, allegedly like exercise onesie thing.
What is it?
And he's doing his ridiculous morning stretches like a child. He clearly doesn't know how to exercise. And it keeps cutting away to this audience couple who are doing it at home themselves along with him in their onesies.
Bounce! Okay, bounce. Come on, you can do it.
So it's a shame that we don't see that couple in the film. But again, they decided, I think with good reason, that some of these scenes were too silly or started to, compromise the tone of the film. There's also things in the trailer for the film that don't appear in the film. The most obvious one is a shot right after when the light lands on the street, where there's like a gap in the sky that then seals up again. And yeah, I think that being taken out is a good thing. Or maybe, maybe it was only made for the trailer to make it more obvious what was happening in the trailer. That's always a possibility. There's also Trutalk, which is clearly kind of compiled from a lot of existing material and deleted scenes, and then they've shot like one or two extra things just for it with other people. It's a bit of extra publicity, and I think it ran on a couple of television channels as a kind of extended marketing campaign. But it also features material, again, which gives us too much insight, too much detail on certain aspects of the show and certain aspects of the characters that are best left, questions best left unanswered. There's that shot right at the beginning of the movie where Meryl's saying, there is no difference. My public life is my life. The Truman Show is my life. There's more stuff either side of that, and Trutalk kind of elaborates a bit unnecessarily.
Those letters that come in from the Free Truman people talking about Truman's rights, Truman's civil liberties. What about Marlon? What about my rights?
I'm a prisoner, and yet I have the financial means to do anything.
I don't feel I'm deprived or there's something I don't have. I'm married to a wonderful man. I live in a beautiful home. There is no difference between a private life and a public life.
And that's where I got the information about Meryl being rich and about various members of the cast expressing feeling like prisoners. And I think, again, this is an exercise in showing, not telling, and kind of withholding details rather than spilling it all, because you give the audience room to make up their own minds. Like I've said before, I think The Truman Show is a film where every department is just on point. Every, member of the team is really, really working together. And it's interesting that the person who ended up directing it, although a lot of people were considered, the person who ended up directing it is Peter Wier, who he's a fantastic director. He's done some fantastic work, but he also he doesn't have like a house style. He can do kind of any genre and work with any script, and really involves himself with the other members on the team instead of imposing a strict vision. So every one of Peter Weir's films is very different, which also means that there's, as we'll talk about at the end, there's not really anything else like The Truman Show, because Peter Wier wasn't in the habit of making the same film again and again like some people. Something I haven't really talked about, but which is a hugely important part of the film, is the music. The soundtrack to The Truman Show is wonderful, and for me it was some very formative music. I don't know how many times I've listened to the piano piece Truman Sleeps, or other pieces of music from the score of that film. It's a phenomenal album. It's a CD that I own, that I've played many, many times. If you don't listen, if you've know the film but have not taken the time to just listen to the soundtrack, I highly recommend it. The music is generally split between two composers, Burkhard Dalwitz and I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, and Philip Glass, who both also cameo in the film at different points. But my favorite piece of music from The Truman Show is not by either of them. It's a piece called Requiem Father Kolbe by Wojciech Kilar. Kilar's a contemporary Polish composer who's made music for stage and film, and actually Requiem Father Kolbe was composed for a Polish film called Life for Life, Maximilian Kolbe, which came out in 1991. It's based on a true story, a heart-wrenching true story about the fate of a group of prisoners in the Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II. And a real person, a real priest called Father Maximilian Kolbe, who chose to die in place of a convicted fellow prisoner. When they came for the other inmate, he threw himself in front and demanded to be taken instead. It's a very emotionally charged and horrible story, and from what I've seen, I haven't seen the original film, but it looks pretty hard going. Now, for context, this is the piece of music that plays at the very final sequence where he's climbing up the stairs, from the boat hitting the wall up to the door when Christoph talks to him. That's the piece of music we're talking about. This very grand, marching. And knowing what it's really about, I think imbues this scene with more meaning. Its history, its lineage, and its connection to this true story of a prisoner in an entirely different situation, of course, but this connection to a real-life martyr, someone who gave up their life for others, has this transcendent value that I think is very deliberate. And if you haven't listened to the whole piece of music, because only about 2 minutes of it are used in the film, go and listen to it. The whole piece, I think, is 14 minutes long. It's incredible. It's so deceptively simple and moving and painful and angry. And in The Truman Show, you really only get like the last little bit of it. So like any good film, there's a lot of trivia out there. It's been 20 years. People have had a long time to dig into it and talk about it. And I'm basically just going to list you a bunch of stuff that I find interesting in no particular order. First up, something on the technical side, which I discovered working on this podcast that I didn't know. Peter Wier filmed the whole thing in the aspect ratio 1.661 to make it feel more like a television show. But apparently only the original DVD is in this aspect ratio. The theatrical cut was cropped to 1.851. And the Blu-ray release, which I have, but I haven't checked this, is 1.781. So out there in the world, there are at least 3 different aspect ratios of this film. The art direction, the costume, the set design is all impeccable in this film. And there are loads and loads of little Easter eggs. I'm not going to list all of them, but I'll talk about a few of my favorites. A fairly obvious one, over the double arches in the town centre, you can read the fictional town of Sea Haven's Latin motto, Unus pro omnibus, omnes pro uno, which means one for all for one, which is fairly relevant to Truman's situation. In a couple of quick shots in the Lunar Room, you can see security guards, and they are wearing t-shirts that say "Love him, protect him" on them in all caps. I've always loved this little detail because for me it implies this kind of weird, like cult-like corporate culture. A lot of the exteriors and some of the interiors for Sea Haven were shot on the coast of Florida in a town that is unimaginatively called Seaside. The production design, the sets, the costumes keep going, right? Another quite noticeable thing is the repeated use of little circles, and they appear everywhere. They appear in the neighbor's garbage can, which actually that actor talks about in Trutalk.
This is the trash can cam, which I helped develop.
You can see them in bollards, you can see them in beams on the wall. Of course, there's Truman's ring, there's the necklace cam. When you start seeing them, you notice that these little orbs, these little black orbs, are kind of everywhere, reinforcing this kind of creepy Big Brother vibe. Something which does slightly date the film is the use of CGI. So the few external shots that we see of the dome and a couple of other things don't quite hold up to scrutiny nowadays. In a couple of wides of the town center, they also extended some of the buildings, which in reality are only 1 story high. You don't notice it unless you're looking for it, but it's not the best CGI in the world. In a scene about halfway through the film, when Truman is messing with a radio, you can see a bottle of vitamin D on the counter. Vitamin D is a supplement that you might take if you don't get enough natural sunlight, which Truman probably doesn't, because he lives in a dome. Every street in Sea Haven seems to refer to a movie actor. You've got Lancaster Square, Barrymore Road, and likewise members of the cast are named after actors: Merrill, Marlon, Lauren, Kirk, Angela, that kind of thing. There's so much detail to be had in the Lunar Room. If you're a nerd for this kind of thing, you gotta rewatch some of the Lunar Room shots and just pause and just have a look around, because there's all kinds of stuff, like the fact that each of the desks that you can see in this massive room full of like vision mixing stations has hanging above it a street name, which gives you an idea of how all of the cameras and screens are organized. There's a building that appears in the town. I think we only get maybe 1 glance of it in the main film, although if you watch Trutalk, you see quite a lot more of it. And it's a company called Omnicom, obviously Omni being kind of all, implying this kind of omniscience, omnipotence, playing on that idea. It's not the most clever. Again, there's so much detail to be had in Sylvia's room as well. Another really good point to pause is there are kind of 2 or 3 shots when she is on the phone to Christoph, where you can pause and you can read all kinds of things. You can look at these posters for rallies that they've held. I've mentioned a couple of times now the board of photos of different members of the cast and notes about them. That's another scene. We only see that set 1 time, basically. In that scene, it's not a place that we return to, but it is so lovingly crafted. Another thing in there is the sign that was on the guy who parachutes into the town. So you get this idea that she probably either organized that or at least knows the people that organized it. It's such brilliant use of set design to kind of embellish and tell more story. I do have things that I don't like about this film. There are a couple of things in particular that I really don't like. My least favorite shot in the film is when the moon becomes a big searchlight. I think it's cartoonish in a way that goes too far. I don't think it's necessary. There's also a very strange moment that I just never really understood for a very long time, and then I looked up what the hell it means. There's a moment in the interview sequence, a very pivotal moment in the film, where they're taking calls to talk to Christoph, and we have one guy who just asks a kind of generic question about how many cameras there are, and later we have Sylvia who calls and has her big interaction with Christoph where we learn a lot about her and her motivations. But in the middle there's this weird little moment where they have a call the interviewer announces as coming from The Hague. He says,
The Hague for Christoph. Hello. The Hague.
I'd never understood this bit, and I'd never even bothered to figure it out, really. Like listening to a song that you love, but you don't know all the words, and you're fine with it. And in the back of my mind, I kind of knew, like, The Hague, that's a place, right? That's like where the, UN World Court is, and they do law and stuff, and it's important. So I looked it up and found people talking about it, and yeah, the implication is that it is someone from The Hague, someone maybe from the court, trying to call Christoph. Maybe he's been screening their calls, and, maybe they're investigating him. They didn't realize they were going to be on air or something, and like they've been trying to contact him and then accidentally called this, while they're on air. And I guess it implies that there are other people out there in the world trying to like gunning for Christoph and trying to take him down. But I don't think it works. I spent 20 years watching this film and never got it, and also didn't really care to even understand it properly until today. I don't think it adds anything to the film, or it's kind of barely intelligible. So yeah, that's a bad bit. That's a bit I would take out. The film also has its fair share of continuity issues. Truman has this bag in front of the Dalmatian, but then he has it down by his side, but the Dalmatian's still on him. Whatever. Who cares? Continuity happens. One continuity mistake that I think is unforgivable and that really upsets me, and it may upset you as well. So it has to do with a very important scene. Once you know it's there, you won't be able to unsee it. So I know I said that the spoiler warning in the first episode was going to be the last one, but if you don't want a very emotional and important part of the film to be ruined for you forever, maybe just skip ahead 30 seconds. Okay? Because it's exhausting knowing that it's there. I hate knowing that it's there. In the very final moments of the film, where Truman is standing in front of the open door leading to a dark, unknown future, and he's talking to Christoph, and there is this tension about what decision he's going to make. We see Truman standing in front of the door from two different angles. We see a kind of clear head and shoulders angle of him, and we see a slightly different angle of him on the monitor that Christoph is holding in the lunar room, right? And the monitor is kind of a reduced color display. It's a bit fuzzy. It's got lines or whatever, right? And he's like talking to it and holding it in his hand. And we see like a picture in picture. What I think has happened is that they didn't have enough coverage for this scene, and they ran out of the, let's call it the A shot, the main shot of Truman, and they had to fill in some of his angle with material from the B shot, which was like a pickup for the monitor. So you've got A and B, and that would be fine because you can match it. He can wear the same stuff. You can shoot on different days, but you can match it. That's the power of cinema. Except that the B shot is not shot in front of an open door with a big, vast black space. It is obviously shot in front of a black plaster board. And you can see the solid texture of a black plaster board about 5 inches behind Truman's head. It's not a door. Once you know it's there, you can never unsee it. And honestly, I think before I watch it again, I'm going to key out the wall and I'm going to fix it myself because I can't watch that scene again knowing it's there. If anyone at Paramount is listening to this, please, Truman Show should get a, proper Criterion treatment at some point, right? Please, for the love of cinema, go in and do a little post-production on that scene for me. Please, for me, Paramount. Just me, your friend, Christopher Bingham. I have one little section left in my show notes for this episode, and it's simply that there is nothing quite like The Truman Show, right? There's nothing out there that scratches that particular itch in that particular way. I really think it's such a unique film. So what is like it? If you enjoy The Truman Show, what else can you watch? What else can you go and watch that is anything remotely like it? As we already discussed, kind of Peter Wier's other films are not really on that list because he just takes all kinds of projects. That's his strength as a director. He goes and does all kinds of things. So there's no other Peter Wier film that really does the same thing. There are other films written and or directed by Andrew Niccol, the writer, that maybe scratch that itch. Things like Gattaca, Lord of War, starring Nicolas Cage, The Terminal, which I love. I think it's an underrated Steven Spielberg film. I think it's really fun. And it's kind of about a stunted man, like, trapped in a limited world and unable to leave, and how that affects all the people around him. It's maybe a stretch, but you could watch The Terminal and get similar jollies to watching The Truman Show. We already mentioned, of course, The Matrix, which came out the year after Truman Show in 1999, and deals with a lot of similar themes, but does so in a very green and black cyberpunk martial arts way. As someone who was born in 1990 and who was starting to kind of really become aware of film and art at the turn of the millennium, there are a lot of late 90s films that I absolutely adore, and that, for me, inhabit a lot of the same space, even if they don't deal with the same subjects. Things like Groundhog Day come to mind, Fight Club. There's a movie that came out the following year, which I haven't seen, called Ed TV, and I'm going to rectify that, because I watched the trailer for it, and it's about a TV studio deciding that the best thing they can do is just film a random dude. And it looks really fun. It stars Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, and I'm probably going to watch it tonight after I finish recording this, but I can't vouch for it. Kind of as a result of The Truman Show, I'm a huge fan of Jim Carrey in his dramatic roles. I mentioned The Number 23, which is a pretty crap film, but he is a good performer in it. And I think one of the closest things that you can get to in terms of tone, in terms of theme, and with the added bonus that you're getting a similar but slightly more downbeat performance from Jim Carrey, is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, an absolutely fantastic film. In the realms of television, there are a few things, the show Unreal, in so much as it's about the cast and crew of a reality show. The sci-fi miniseries Ascension, in so much as there's a twist, I'm trying not to give it away, about the character's perception of reality. Joss Whedon's Dollhouse, even though it only got 2 seasons, I really enjoy it, and it has this kind of serialized intrigue of the dolls becoming aware of their situation. Something like Pleasantville might get you there. Or hell, Toy Story 4. Woody, by the end of that film, spoilers, Woody moves on and enters the great unknown of his new life, leaving his friends behind. And that's the reason that Toy Story 4 is better than Toy Story 3. Suck it, don't at me. Toy Story 4 is a masterpiece, and Toy Story 3 is garbage. And it's because Woody takes that same journey that Truman does. But really, when it comes down to it, there's just nothing like The Truman Show.
In case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
I hope listening to me ramble for 6 episodes about my favorite film has been enjoyable. Maybe you're listening to this because it's your favorite film as well. Maybe you're listening to this because you've watched it for the first time and you want to know more about it. Maybe you're listening to this because you're a fan of mine and maybe through this you've discovered this film that you never knew about. Whatever the reason, I hope you learned something. I hope it taught you a bit about the film. I hope it made you think maybe a little differently about film in general. I'm going to leave you with a little section of an article I found from 2018, the film's 20th anniversary, on a website called Our Movie Life. The film has so much to it, so much to take from, so much to learn. We should cherish, save, study, and love The Truman Show. It's worth it.